What a treat today. First things first though, I'm looking good, feeling good, loving life. I hope you can say the same thing. Today we have an absolute indie wrestling legend. You know him as the Wiseguy, Jimmy Cicero. He's Matt Bowman. He's wrestled everywhere. He is a booker, wrestler, a general jack of all trades when it comes to wrestling. I'm very honored to have the Wiseguy, Jimmy Cicero, here today.
Hey, thank you, Kato.
So we're going to jump right into it.
Okay.
How did a love of wrestling start for you?
Started when I was about 14 or so, and believe it or not, it probably helped to save my childhood. And when I say that, I grew up in a home where my mother and father had a very bad relationship, a lot of fighting, and it wasn't necessarily the most peaceful home in the world. So wrestling was my escape. Okay, and so for me, whether it was watching Bob Backlund on the WWF or watching Southwest Championship Wrestling with Bruiser Bob Sweetan and Tully Blanchard, that was my escape from the real world. And I embraced it so wholeheartedly that it became almost an obsession. Actually, not almost. It did become an obsession with me.
So you mentioned Bob Backlund. You mentioned Tully Blanchard. Mm-hmm. Did you have a favorite growing up?
Yeah, I'd say Backlund was one of my favorites just because he was one of the first people that I became acclimated to, that I watched on a regular basis, and that I would go to the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland to watch every month. And then when I was watching Southwest Championship Wrestling, I became a fan of Scott Casey and Bob Sweetan. Then they switched over and they put on Georgia Championship Wrestling, and it was nothing like Wildfire Tommy Rich for me. So that was,
I hear you. That was my first love in wrestling as well.
Right.
So let's fast forward.
Mm-hmm.
You decide you're going to get in the wrestling business. When did you start training?
I started training when I was 22. I originally, 2 years before that, I went to Norfolk, Virginia. And I had heard Lou Thez at a school. So I went there and met with Lou Thez. And he's one of the greatest of all time. And that goes without saying. But he seemed sort of bitter on the business when I went down there. He didn't seem very enthusiastic. And I thought, this might not be a good fit for me, because I was 100% all about learning pro wrestling, and he was not very favorable as to the way the wrestling had transitioned or transformed by that time. Okay, by the early '90s. And I met Mark Fleming, who was down there at the time. And Mark was a legitimate shooter and a really good wrestler, but it just didn't resonate with me. So then I went back home, continued to try to weight train, and then I went down to Ivan Koloff School 2 years later. And
tell me about it. What was that like?
Yeah, that was in Indian Trail, North Carolina. That was, I saw that there was a school. It was called the Koloff Fernandez Fantastics Wrestling School, okay, which was Manny Fernandez, Bobby and Jackie Fulton, and Ivan Koloff. And what I did is I said, okay, let me go ahead and call and leave a message. And so I called the number on the flyer and left a message. And 2 days later, I get a phone call. I answer, and I'm like, hello? Hey, I'm trying to reach Matt Bowman. I said, this is Matt. Hey, Matt, Ivan Koloff here. And I went, come on. Was this Brian? Who is this really? It's Ivan Koloff. I got your message. Doesn't sound like the Russian Bear. Hold on a second, please. Crap, that's Ivan Koloff. Oh my God. So then I got back on the phone and said, yes, sir, I'm sorry. And he goes, it's okay. A lot of people, I don't truly have that much of a raspy voice, only when I need to. And I said, okay. And he goes, I understand that you're interested. And I said, yes. He goes, now you have to understand that Manny left and Jackie comes down and trains, but Bobby went back to Ohio. And so now it's just his school. He runs it himself with help sometimes from Jackie Fulton and some of the other Mid-Atlantic mainstays that pop in. And I went, okay, I'd like to come down and meet with you. And I went down and met with him. We did a tryout to make sure that I was physically okay to do it. And he said, yeah. He goes, well, you meet the physical qualifications. You'll need to move down here to North Carolina. But there's a person that runs a promotion from South Atlantic Pro Wrestling, and he's also a real estate guy, so he can set you up in an efficiency in Charlotte, and you can live there while you train. So that's what I did. And so
what were some of your early obstacles when you first started training?
Learning what pro wrestling was, because I had in my mind, I thought, oh, I know what this is. I had no idea. You know, he had 2 rings, and he had a former Worldwide Wrestling Mid-Atlantic ring, and then he had a short, stubby blue ring that was as hard as a rock. And we weren't allowed to get in the nice ring until we had put in at least 6 weeks in the blue ring. And that's where we learned how to bump, in the blue ring, okay? And after taking the first 2 sessions in a row, okay, Saturday and Sunday, did nothing but bump drills. And then I went back to my efficiency, and I set the tub, and I sat in the tub, and I took 5 or 6 Advil, and I laid there and thought, what am I doing? What am I doing? I can't do this. This is crazy. I can barely move right now. And then the next morning I got up and went, okay, I still feel okay. And then I went back, and I kept going back. The obstacles also mentally were learning the nuances, as you know, the nuances of pro wrestling in terms of just how it works, what's important, you know. And Ivan would always preach safety, above all else, safety. You know, so people want to say, oh, I want to have a good match, safety. He wants to make sure you're responsible, okay, for that other guy. You're responsible, so you might want to make sure that you are safe in that ring and that you understand how to do everything correctly. And Ivan was such a stickler for everything as simple as a body slam. When you pick him up, he's like, okay, remember, think of a spatula turning he did analogies a lot. Think of a spatula turning a pancake over. Well, what that is that's your hand going to the back of his neck now, and as you're coming down, you're planting him for a body slam, but you're making sure he's in a position to take it flat, okay, safely, okay. And he would make sure he was very patient. He was not like you see on these schools on the TV, these reality shows where they would bark and yell at you. And he was very patient with it, but he was also to the point where we're not moving on until we get this. Something as simple as a hip toss. Okay, you're taking a hip toss, look up. Why do you got to look up? Because your body is going to go where your eyes are, okay? And for 2 or 3 straight days, I would flop over, and he would say, we're going to do it again. We're not moving on until you get this. And so those were some of the tough but necessary nuances that we had in the wrestling school. But I'll tell you what, such a great trainer. And I don't just say, I'm obviously partial, but such a great trainer and so patient. I mean, such a kind man Ivan Koloff was.
Let's say today they put a time machine right in that corner right there. Mm-hmm. You today could go back to your first day of training to tell yourself something. What would it be?
Oh, wow. Probably to shut up. Because I think I went in, talking about the first day of training, I went in with the conception that I already knew 50% of it, and I knew 0% of it. Mm-hmm. I wasn't disrespectful or anything. I was too afraid to be disrespectful. But I still thought, I kind of know how this goes, you know, because, yeah, I wrestled with the guys, you know, in gym class or in the backyard or something, because I know how this goes. And I didn't know at all. And Ivan made sure that he drilled that in me. Forget everything you think you know. And that's something that I would probably go in there and almost like an eraser on a chalkboard, I would just say, nope, a clean slate. I don't know a damn thing. Let's go ahead and let me just be a sponge and take everything in.
How does Matt Bowman become the wise guy Jimmy Cicero? Where does that come from?
Well, I came up with the name Jimmy Cicero. I was actually a big fan of the movie Goodfellas. And 2 of the major characters for the movie Goodfellas were Robert De Niro, who played Jimmy Conway, and Paul Sorvino, who played Paulie Cicero. So I took Jimmy and Cicero from the 2 characters, put them together, and then the book, the movie Goodfellas was based on a book called Wiseguy. So I said, okay, I'm going to take Wiseguy, Jimmy, Cicero, and that's what I went with. Now, I will say that initially I started off wrestling in Delaware for a promoter named Jim Kettner, and I took Jimmy Cicero to that promotion and tried to force feed a really bad Italian accent, and and it was bad. And I pretty much I I abandoned that probably a few months after that and said, I'm just going to be Wiseguy Jimmy Cicero as myself and not try to force feed a really bad accent. It was sort of like when Axel Rotten, God rest his soul, was in Global Wrestling and was British. Okay,
Sure.
So, I mean, it's the business, and we've all, you learn by failing, you know, and so, and I fell off the horse so many times and everything else, but you learn that way, and that was one of the things that I had to turn around. But I really, and the more people that I got to know that just knew me as Cicero, I was like, okay. So I just stuck with that gimmick, and for 26 years now, I've gone with Wiseguy Jimmy Cicero.
You speak of the business. You know, probably as well as anybody, there's a lot of critics in the business. A lot of people who will anonymously hate you. What would those people say about you?
If they didn't like me, it's hard to say. I mean, I try to get along with everybody, but unfortunately, a lot of things you can be guilty by association. So if someone has a beef with some of the people that I put over constantly, like Tom Brandy, I make no bones about the fact that Tom Brandy and King Kalua were mentors of mine, and so I always put them over, sometimes ad nauseum. And people might say, Cicero, he's a kiss ass, and you know what? They're probably right. When it comes to guys like that, I am a kiss ass, but that's just the way. I'm that thankful to those guys for doing everything they've done for me that I'll never ever forget that. And to me, that's just the way it is. So, you know, if people think, well, Jimmy Cicero, you know, maybe he's not being genuine with his you know, mindset or his compliments, and he really probably has a heel side to him. Not really. I mean, there have been times when I've been jealous. Yes, Steve Corino and I teamed up for years and years, and when Steve made it up in ECW and I was still doing jobs, you know, in WWE or doing jobs for ECW, I was jealous. Okay, I was really, I was envious and jealous and mad, and because I thought, well, why not me? You know, why? Yeah, and then I got jealous when Julio De Niro, okay, who was my former tag team partner and really good friend, he started getting a bump and a boost up there, okay? And I got jealous when my two students, Joey Matthews and Christian York, okay? And I'm like, and then I realized, you know, it took me a while, and probably after the birth of my two kids, most recently, my 11-year-old, my 9-year-old, perspective set in, and I realized, wow, I really have had a good time in this wrestling. I've made some great friends, and these have been some good friends of mine, and how dare I come across like a jerk and be jealous of these guys who've done nothing to me. They just were there. They had it at the time. And you know, hey, you know what? I pride myself on being a good hand now. And I look at that. Bill Apter says it best when he says, look, you're a good journeyman. Embrace that. And so now at almost age 50, it's perspective now.
I can't help but smile because my sixth question on here is, at this point in your career, you've wrestled for the original ECW and WWE. Is there ever a point you think back and have regrets and say to yourself, why didn't they sign me? Why do you think, like, you were there? Like, I watched this week because I was getting ready for this, several of your matches on television for ECW or WWE. I saw one with Tom Brandy that was actually pretty competitive. Why do you think they didn't sign you?
I think that a couple of things. I was a late bloomer. I think I lacked the charisma that was necessary and the confidence that was necessary. When the time came, when push came to shove, and I was up in ECW, I didn't grab the ring. I sat and I kind of waited for the ring to come around to me. And while I was waiting, some of my you know, colleagues and buddies, they were like, "Screw this! I'm grabbing that ring." And I didn't grab the ring. I sat there and was like, I'll just wait and see what Paul has for me, you know. And what Paul had for me was go out there and wrestle Chris Candido, 8-minute match, take his finish, okay? Go out there and wrestle Axel Rotten, or go out there and wrestle, you know, Balls Mahoney or the Dudleys. And so I would do that, but these other guys were getting a chance to get their charisma and their character over, and they all had it, you know. And those guys they earned everything they had. It was my own fault that I didn't do that. And I beat myself up over that. At first I was jealous, like I said. Then after a while I was kind of like, damn, am I a loser? And then after talking with Bill Apter in depth about a few things, I realized, no, that was just, I take pride in what my position was. You can't sit there and get mad about your own. I mean, the past is the past. I can't do anything about it now. So I look back and go, but I get along with the guys, and I did a good job of putting people over, and I'm accepted in the fraternity of pro wrestling. So everything's okay now, you know.
What kind of advice would you give to somebody who wants to get into wrestling now?
It's a different era than when you and I were getting started with the age of social media, Facebook, and everything else. So it would be hard for me to give probably the best kind of advice. I would say the same advice that the same type of thing that I had with Ivan, which was be really respectful. There's some respectful kids out there right now. I was telling you before about this kid Thomas Mathis, who is just super respectful. He gets it as far as that goes, and I think that's almost more important. Your approach to how you are going to be in the locker room and how you're going to be with promoters and bookers. That's almost more important than if you can do a 3 or 450 splash and what moves you can execute. I would tell them to be respectful, to be polite, to listen, and to travel. Okay, be willing to travel. A lot of these kids nowadays, and I sound like Clint Eastwood from Gran Torino, but a lot of these kids now, they don't travel. They 45 minutes to an hour, and if it's more than that, I can't make it. And then you have some kids who will do the 7-8 hour drives and understand it. And you have to understand, it's not just a matter of of committing to the drive, but that's what builds character. You develop a toughness in your skin by driving. You're talking business the whole 8 hours if you're driving with somebody else, and you're digesting what you learned on the last show on the ride home. So I would say, take the drives, make the drives, learn as much as you can, wrestle in a variety of different promotions and towns and everything, so that you get a little piece of everything. Understand that there's no such thing as I'm a heel or I'm a face. You're a wrestler. You are what the promoter tells you, okay? So just be open to all of that, digest it all, learn, and be patient, okay? Being patient, that's not going to come overnight. You've got to fail to succeed.
Okay.